Terrence Malick is one of the most iconic film directors alive, known for award-winning art house movies with A-list cast, but we barely know anything about Terrence Malick. There are only a handful of photos of Malick online. He doesn't give any interviews and no public appearances. His personal and private life is a complete mystery, and I think there might be a deeper purpose to it. In 1978, Malick just released his second feature film, Days of Heaven, and all eyes of the industry were on the 35-year-old director. Malick won the prestigious Best Director award at the Cannes Film Festival, and Days of Heaven was nominated for 4 Oscars. Shortly thereafter, Malick was profiled in a magazine along with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, and one critic said that Malick could never make a film again and still be considered a legend. Well, during the peak of this young director's hype, all doors were open to him in the Hollywood movie industry. He decided instead to disappear and don't come back again for 20 years. And there are a lot of theories about what happened during these 20 years until Terrence Malick decided to come back again with his film The Thin Red Line. Malick has declined every single interview request he's gotten since 1975, which leaves room for all kinds of speculation online. On Wikipedia you can read all kinds of different accounts of Malick working on different projects between 1978 and 1998 and never even finishing the screenplays. A movie like The English Speaker, for example, that according to Peter Biskind, which is like a Hollywood historian, seemed to be like The Exorcist as written by Dostoevsky. And there are also reportings that he wanted to adapt A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, who was also a Christian, for the stage, and some kind of movie version of a modern day version of The Grapes of Wrath. A lot of his reported passion project during that 20-year time period have one connection to the Days of Heaven. A lot of these projects in one form or another deal with Christianity. After Malick's 20-year hiatus, all of his films carried a very clear Christian perspective that sometimes was more recognizable and sometimes less. The Thin Red Line, The New World, and his conceptual trilogy of To the One, The Knight of Cups, Song to Song all deal with spiritual and philosophical themes while never fully committing to leading back to God. On the other hand, The Tree of Life is, in my opinion, probably the best Christian film ever made, and his most recent film, A Hidden Life, dealt with Christian themes in such a serious way I had never seen before in a movie. And his next film is even announced to be a film adaptation of the life of Jesus. Looking back at the 20-year break in the middle of Malick's career, it just makes me wonder, was it there that Terrence Malick found God? Before we ask ourselves if Terrence Malick is the boldest Christian filmmaker in Hollywood right now, or a cultural Christian kind of using the faith for aesthetic and storytelling purposes, I want to look deeper into the film that actually made him disappear for 20 years. Days of Heaven was released in 1978 and is an art house period drama with romantic elements. It's about a young man who kills his boss in an industrial factory, and together with his partner and younger sister they flee the city life of Chicago into a rural part of the country to work on a farm. The boss of the farm falls in love with the protagonist woman, and when the young couple finds out that the farmer is sick, they decide to pretend to be brother and sister and have the woman marry the farmer in hopes to get their hands on his inheritance after his death. But when the expected death fails to come, jealousy, impatience, and emotions are slowly setting in, and violence, chaos, and death follow. Watching this film, there are 3 things that immediately strike you. It looks absolutely beautiful. Days of Heaven has often been named to be the most beautiful film ever made, and I think rightly so. Rarely have you seen the beauty of nature depicted on screen in such an elegant way. Second of all, the storytelling is quite unusual. There's only little dialogue in the film, and instead of like classic scene sequences and structure with setup, conflict, and resolution, the scenes almost play out in a documentary kind of way. Sometimes I honestly wondered what the characters were going through, and you kind of catch up because things are happening sometimes faster and sometimes slower than your internal thought process. The dialogue sometimes are even even hard to hear, and everything you see on screen feels just like it's happening for real. And all of this gives the movie a sense of unexpectancy and naturalism that feels really special. The third thing you notice is this movie feels less personal but more meaningful than most movies you have seen. I would compare Days of Heaven to a biblical parable. A parable is a simple story used to illustrate a complex moral or spiritual lesson. It's what Jesus did again and again in the Bible, explaining concepts to his disciples. If we recognize biblical connections in Days of Heaven, it's more than just interpretation, given that the title of the movie is literally Days of Heaven. The movie is very rich when it comes to psychological, philosophical, and spiritual levels. The title in and of itself is beautiful and kind of gives us this idea of heaven as a place or a version of heaven as a place with an expiration date. Truthfully, this is what the protagonists in the film get because they built their life on sin, on murder. We get some blissful moments in the film, but all of the beautiful moments in Days of Heaven are basically haunted by a moment of destruction that follows. The comparisons of the story of a young couple pretending to be brother and sister has striking similarities to Abraham and Sarah pretending to be siblings in Genesis and them experiencing a natural disaster in the aftermath, just like they do in Days of Heaven. There is a big difference between Genesis and Days of Heaven. While Abraham and Sarah hide who they are in order to escape getting killed by the Pharaoh and Sarah to be taken by the Pharaoh, the couple in the movie do the same thing out of greed in order to get their hands on somebody's inheritance. In both cases, God sends judgment onto the wicked. In Genesis, on the Pharaoh, in Days of Heaven, on the protagonists. And there are more very Christian things in this movie. For example, there's a short scene where a priest blesses the field before the harvest, and it's just a short moment that might even go over your head if you don't pay attention, but if you look closely in the scene, what is being expressed there is the relationship each and every character has to God in that scene, and you recognize this on the faces of the characters. Like, it's a brilliantly acted scene. If you watch the movie, pay close attention. Later on, there's another impressive scene with a plague of locusts that reminds us of Exodus. Actually, fun fact to that scene, they kind of filmed all of these swarms of locusts by this is all of the footage you see in these scenes is played in reverse, and they did this by having helicopters fly above the field where they shot and had peanut shells dropping down, and in the end had all of these scenes played in reverse, and it looks absolutely stunning. The production of Days of Heaven was really complicated. Almost all of the film was shot on location during golden hour, which lasts around 30 minutes a day. The cast reported that Terrence Malick had quite unclear communication on set. The project even went over budget by almost $1 million, and Malick had to do significant changes in the edit, reshoot some things, re-edit a lot of the movie because at first it didn't work at all. And there's an argument to be made that Terrence Malick didn't make another movie for 20 years because the production of Days of Heaven was so complicated and exhausting. From another angle, it also seems like Malick could be this eccentric perfectionist just because of how many projects during the 20 years he started and stopped and didn't finish after that. On this channel, often address outspoken filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, Paul Schrader, Scott Derrickson, David Ayer. Like, these are successful Hollywood filmmakers who also openly profess their faith. But the fruits of that aren't there in their filmographies, which gives a really confusing picture of Christians and the Christian faith. The films of all of these directors are more about the directors than they are about God. Certainly we can't know where the heart of a director is or where his faith is at if we don't know the director personally, but the Bible teaches us that you can recognize real believers by their fruits. And when we look at Terrence Malick, we see a man who doesn't want any attention on him, but rather on his work and on the movies. And I admit most of his filmography isn't fully Christian, but is more reflective of a struggling Christian. But then again, like I said, a film like A Hidden Life, which is his latest film, is proof of how good and universal Christian filmmaking can be. And Malick's next film is supposed to be a film about Jesus. So again, if we look at the 20-year hiatus of Malick, what if it was there that he found God and what followed was a process of purification and a filmmaker kind of figuring out how he can use his talents in order to glorify God that lasted another 20 years. This is just me speculating, and we will see how all of this would play out in the next couple of decades. And when I look at a film like Days of Heaven and Tree of Life and A Hidden Life, the question shouldn't be that if these films were made by a Christian, the question rather should be, is it possible for somebody who doesn't believe in Jesus to make a movie like A Hidden Life? I don't think that's possible. As a film fan, I really hope to get to see more beautiful films by Terrence Malick in the next couple of years and even decades. And as a Christian, I pray that Terrence Malick will keep using his talent in new ways in order to glorify God and keep leading the world of filmmaking to Jesus, because we all need it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video today. I wish you all a blessed day and hope to have you back in the next one.